listen-only mode.
Hello, I'm Pearl Jean Mabe, and I would like to welcome everyone to today's webinar. Webinars are brought to you as a benefit of a membership benefit of Heritage Ohio. Heritage Ohio's mission is to help people to save the places that matter, build community, and live better. Today we have a presentation on next exit history. As a note, most issues with the webinar software will be solved if you close the program and restart it with the link that was sent to you. Our presenters today are Patrick, Timothy, and David, and I'll let them introduce themselves because that way you can hear who they are. And with that, I'll hand it over to Patrick.
Thank you very much, Pearl. I appreciate it. We certainly appreciate the opportunity to be here today. This whole thing started because Kevin Pape, who I believe is on the board there for some time, learned about us and got so enthusiastic. He said, "You guys need to come and speak to our members." And so we put this together, and we're just so pleased it could happen. I'm Patrick Moore. I'm at the University of West Florida down in beautiful Pensacola, which is right at the tip of the Panhandle, nowhere near Disney World. I direct the public history program, and for those people unfamiliar with public history, we actually teach our students here how to do things outside of the traditional teaching, writing, academic world. And so this project started off as an initiative there and has moved forward. Tim.
Hi, my name is Tim Roberts, and along with Patrick, I am one of the co-inventors of Next Exit History. I was at the University of West Florida at that point, and I currently help run day-to-day operations for 321 Innovations, which is the umbrella organization, the company that works with Next Exit History and provides services as such. And I'm also a research historian with Historical Research Associates, and I typically am in Pensacola, Florida, but today I am in northern Minnesota on research assignment. So we're kind of spread out across the country today. So, David?
Yeah, I'm Dave Strohmeyer. I am project manager and historian with Historical Research Associates, currently speaking to you from beautiful Missoula, Montana, and I'm also a partner with 321 Innovations, as our other two panelists today are, and I have a foot firmly in the world of cultural resource management for those of you involved in that aspect of what I think many of you might be interested in, and I'm also a historian focusing on not only digital technology but how to better communicate and interpret to a broad array of audiences, particularly when it comes to economic development.
Thanks, Dave. So today our presentation, we're going to try and keep it as engaging as possible. Doesn't have a lot of graphics and video because we know it's kind of funky for some people who are out there. But really our goal, we're going to start off, talk about the background of this program we called Next Exit History, where it developed at the University of West Florida as really as a solution to a lot of interpretive problems, and then it evolved into sort of an economic engagement, economic development engine. Then we're going to jump in there, we're going to talk about kind of the current state of mobile technology environment in the United States. For a long time, people thought maybe this was a passing fad, as I'm sure everybody is aware when you look at any restaurant with everybody's glued to their phones. Not a fad, it's the new reality. Then we're going to talk about how Next Exit History has evolved over time and sort of adapting those things, and how really we're looking at blending this into sort of a standardized approach. Then we'll jump into actually a case study of how Next Exit History has worked in an economic development and interpretive model there in Montana that Dave is going to cover. And then we're going to look at sort of the focus of the future of Next Exit History, how the app works, and then be able to answer any questions. So what we, I guess, typically has done, that if folks have questions along the way, you can post them in the box. Pearl is going to help moderate that. But if there's something that comes up, a really pressing issue that we need to cover right away, please feel free to jump in. We want this to be as fluid and interesting as possible, rather than just sort of talking heads to qualify it somewhere along the way. So we'll get started with that. Next Exit History itself, really, as I said before, started at the University of West Florida. Years back, almost 10 years ago, back in 2006, another one of the inventors, colleague, and I were driving early morning over to Tallahassee from Pensacola and needed a cup of coffee, and I pulled out my computer and plugged in my GPS unit. I'm sure we passed 2 or 3 exits before we actually got it running. But the conversation, instead of just gas stations and fast food restaurants, what else could you put in here? And being historians and working with communities and looking at interpretation of historic sites, we thought all of these little towns, everybody bypasses as they go by the Exxon station and the Kentucky Fried Chicken. They don't really ever go that extra, maybe sometimes just a quarter mile into the town. How can we bring this as a resource into people? And we saw this foundation as a necessary opportunity to use technology in a way that people couldn't really do. And when we looked at that process, we thought, every community has a story to tell. And while we live in Pensacola and it's beautiful on the beach, and those folks in Montana have the mountains, every town has something interesting about them. Every town has something engaging. And the question is, how can you bring that history that's all around them right into the hands and the minds of the general public? And we also, as historians, recognize that there are challenges that communities face in interpreting their history. One is, how do you tell that story within a larger statewide, even regional, but let alone national context? And people were very excited about it. So recognizing this, we thought about, how do we tell that story in a way that's engaging? How do you provide that access to those people who are traveling, at least in our corridor where we started this, on the way from Houston or Louisiana as they bolt their way down to see Disney World? And how do we get them off? And how do you make those things relevant? And at the time when we came up with this was 2006. This was a year before even the very first iPhone came out. So the idea of technology being in the palm of your hand constantly was still out on the horizon. And we realized that for those people who wanted to create some kind of at least a web-based version, it was far beyond what most small communities' economic opportunities could possibly provide. And so we thought if we could create a system where we as historians could work with other historians in the community, how can we create that bridge so that everybody, despite how much money they have, can participate in this process? And really early on, we didn't connect this thing to economic development, but rather how do you get people into the communities? And really it was how we came into that world that tied those economic development side and the Main Street operations and the heritage tourism side to really create this relationship. So because of that, Next Exit History evolved as really as a solution to bring information, to bring knowledge about the cool, interesting parts of the communities to people, but at the same time, take those people to places where those opportunities exist. And often, the heart of those communities is right there on those Main Street areas, bridging people together. So we also, as public historians, recognize that the landscape is different, and we really encourage people in what we look at as interpretation. How do we tell a story that's engaging not just to other historians? This isn't by any means to dismiss academic historians within the ivory tower, but within communities. How do we tell a story that's going to be exciting to history buffs, that's going to be exciting to young people, to senior citizens, millennials? How can you do this along the way? And in turn, get people not just learn about the history, but engage, relate to the places that they're visiting in brand new ways. So this whole thing started back in 2006, as I already mentioned, and looking at how we tie these parts together, bring people together, and use that historic sites as a medium. And then to connect people using geolocation, what we now know is commonplace with our cell phones that shows you where you are, the Yelp model, that you know where everything is, but how do we tie those history pieces into something where people want to look at it? And then physically drive those individuals toward historic sites. Luckily, when we started this process in 2006, and the original idea was actually to connect these through Garmin, GPS, TomTom units that you would have on your dashboard, at the same time we had technologists at the University of West Florida who saw a bigger opportunity. And how do we create these things with mobile personal computers, smartphones that soon came along, that really began this connection going forward. So in 2007, we actually created our first app. Not going to lie, it was a mess. That was certainly at the time when people would say, hey, I can create an app, I got $5,000. If anybody's ever downloaded an app that didn't work very well, we went there. We went through the process, but we launched this first app, which was really basic in its approach, but it gave us a foundation, and probably one of our best tools for judging it was our own students here at the University of West Florida. They not only helped create content, but also were the biggest critics, because if it doesn't work right off the bat, they didn't want to play with it. And so with that, we had this great test model, and multiple versions going forward has brought us up to where we are to the present. So as we were doing this, we began working with communities themselves and organizations across Florida. The communities that we recognize, those ones right off those interstate corridors going down I-10, down I-75, and saying, what are these communities and how can we relate to them? How can we create content that will excite people about what's happening? This grew in turn through a Florida Humanities Council grant that they funded an initial project that we initially, which is a little embarrassing, called Operation Past Cast, which sounds like something you might get after you eat at Taco Bell. But then we changed it to Next Exit History, which made a lot more sense. The Florida Secretary of State discovered it, and then they pushed it forward as part of their big Viva 500 celebration, Visit Florida. They put information about Next Exit History in all of our visitor centers across the state of Florida, so as people stopped at the rest areas, they could learn about it. And it got really too big, so much to the point that we said there's no way this can continue as a university project just because we have so many interested parties in doing it. And this was really where the relationship kicked in with the Historical Research Associates in 2013. And this was a great opportunity because Historical Research Associates, a company that had been around for 40 years, understood the professionalization of history, worked with clients, delivering quality product, be able to deal with contracts, whether or not they were grant levels or whether or not it was right down to working directly with government agencies or local communities. This was a perfect partnership that came along. And at the same time this was happening, we were actually nominated for and became a finalist for the Innovation Coast Awards competition. And there was a real value to this, and while we lost, unfortunately, to a company that could figure out whether you had retinal damage in minutes, a bummer when you're trying to look at a history app, at the same time, they were really great in providing us coaches across the board that said, how can you connect this to a value? How can you turn this really into an economic development engine? Because you can drive people directly to the sites, really creating a handshake between the historic community and those entities, historical societies, small museums, parks, resources, and create that relationship with those people who are really looking for heads and beds to develop that economic front because there's something compelling to see. And so this really was the new partnership that emerged. And out of that time, success breeds more success, so much to the point that we have now recently actually emerged into another company called 321 Innovations that Tim just mentioned. And it really has a three-way partnership. The University of West Florida, the academic side about how we still can work with our students. We create relationships through the National Council on Public History with historians and students everywhere in the United States, even in Europe. We just came back recently from a trip to China. Everybody excited about this because it has that grassroots connection going down. Historical Research Associates, which I mentioned, a very professional side of the history and industry, and then of course ZenWorks. This is really sort of the last piece of this magical puzzle because they're our technology company. And anybody who has any experience with app development, unlike putting up a sign outside of a building that can be taken down or it needs to be changed, technology evolves. I like to say it's a little bit like having a child. It grows. You have an app. It's great. It can't stay there. The next version comes out. You have to give it new clothes, and you have to send it to school, and it gets bigger and more complicated. And this relationship with ZenWorks, which is a company based in Seattle, which has long standing history with technology development, they recognize the value of this, and we created a three-way partnership. And this new entity really solves some major problems, solutions to acknowledging that we can adjust, we can adapt, we can provide for a broad range of clients, not just with Next Exit History, but with other heritage tourism and other history kinds of needs that they have in terms of technology. And this partnership has really become something very special and exciting. We recently just completed a major contract signing that we're working on now for the new Smithsonian African American History and Culture Museum, really going in another direction. And knowing that technology is constantly changing, just like economies in downtown areas, we need to be ready for that. So this partnership has really been a key component in moving this project forward. So I'm going to pass this over now to Tim, who is going to sort of pick up on looking at some of those key economic development elements and understanding how the trends and the growth in technology and how Next Exit History has worked over time. Tim.
Thank you, Patrick. So as Patrick said, I'm going to briefly talk about some emerging trends in the environment of mobile applications, and really the catalyst for why and how Next Exit History has grown over the years, and also why it's so important for heritage organizations, historians, and other stewards of cultural resources to be working within this sphere or mobile environment. So just quickly, some interesting statistics, recent statistics related to the new kind of emerging mobile environment. I say new, it's really, as Patrick mentioned, becoming the rule rather than the exception. So as of this year, about 64% of American adults now own a smartphone, and that number is actually higher among younger demographics. So people between the ages of 18 and 35, it's upwards of 85%. Additionally, polls have shown that about 46% of those who own smartphones believe it to be something that they now can not live without. And while that is a little disconcerting from a cultural standpoint, it also opens up opportunities for interpreters to utilize this technology to present information and grab a hold of the attention of these people. So now, with this kind of saturation of the market from the mobile environment, what we end up having is basically a large contingent, a growing contingent of the U.S. population walking around with an interpretive platform in their hands. So beyond just that, in the last couple years especially, native mobile apps, meaning actual pieces of software on smartphones rather than mobile web apps and mobile websites, have made up 77% of the increase in digital media usage moving forward, and that's a pretty impressive number. In general, media consumption on mobile devices has far outpaced the movements towards television and other kind of traditional medias. And as of 2014, mobile media consumption surpassed desktop consumption. And there's even been a pretty large increase in the number of people in the United States who now do not have access to high-speed internet at their homes, but rather only through their mobile devices. So it's becoming one of the best and most important ways to reach out to audiences in terms of getting messages out there related to anything, but especially from our point of view, heritage resources. So I'm going to transition now and just talk a little about how we utilize this technology to present information to folks moving through cultural environments, and exactly kind of a little bit of a walkthrough of the current Next Exit History app. So really the Next Exit History approach, sorry about that. So the Next Exit History approach to mobile interpretation really starts with a foundation of engaging content. So at its most basic level, Next Exit History tells you where you are and what historic sites are around you. We base the predominant interface on a map, which has become kind of the standard for mobile interpretation, you know, the typical Google map interface that most people are familiar with, and it's one of the emerging industry best practices. So this initial experience is really meant to help users visualize the cultural landscape and lead them to sites that they are near and or interested in. They can even choose turn-by-turn directions to get them to a specific site, and each site in the database has a corresponding pin on the virtual map. Users can preview those sites by clicking on a pin and getting a thumbnail image and a brief overview, very brief little narrative about what the resource is. And if they choose to learn more about the site, they can then click on that thumbnail and be taken to a more expansive interpretive experience. So we currently have about 60,000 historic sites within our database, ranging from state historic markers to museums, archaeological sites, and more. And as Patrick said, this database grew very rapidly, and we kind of had to adapt the way that we presented the information to people, and we're continuing to do so. So with this large of a database, we provide users with a variety of ways to kind of tailor-make their experience to fit their personal interest. Users can search via key and location, or choose pre-created thematic tours that we refer to as backpacks. And these tours are often the creations of organizations that we work with. And they can be designed around any number of topical themes, such as architectural history, or African American history, or temporal themes like Victorian history, or maybe even, say, a community-based backpack around a individual community, or a main street for that matter. So really, any way that you can imagine to organize your history, we can help present that to users. And individual sites within the database can be added to multiple tours, basically creating an endless array of how to strategically move people through the landscape. So at the heart of NEH really is our attempt apologies guys, the slides are not, there we go, moving forward. So at the heart of NEH is our focus on engaging storytelling, and the genesis of NEH at an academic institution was really grounded in our desire to make history come alive and to encourage the public to constantly be thinking about the historical world around them, and whether they were standing in the middle of colonial Williamsburg or whether they were standing in the middle of a main street in Ohio. So we wanted to constantly have them be thinking, much like we do as historians, about the cultural landscape around them. So the details page is where we really get to expand the interpretive material in a variety of ways. So we also ensure that all of our content is clearly connected to the groups and organizations we work with, whether that be a museum or a historic society or a state historic group or something of that nature. So from the details page, users can access historical narratives, audio vignettes, video clips, and a whole host of different media that way. So historic imagery, contemporary imagery, and the like. The NEH database was designed to present interpretive material really in a variety of ways so that the experience is as immersive and engaging as possible. But beyond this interpretive component, we also wanted to make this as interactive and engaging as possible. And we've done that through the implementation. Here's some additional slides on some of the interpretive content. Move one more forward. Apologies again, it's not seeming to be moving forward. There we go. One more. There we go. So we really wanted to make this as social and engaging as possible. So we developed what we call History Hunters, which is an interactive gaming element that utilizes the historic landscape to get people to engage in a variety of different activities. And it was really developed to encourage people to do more than just learn about the history around them. So users can check in at historic sites, earn points towards virtual badges. There's a leaderboard that they can compete with other people playing the game. They can answer trivia questions about the sites around them and explore the area while searching for scavenger hunt questions as well. And all of these interactive elements are shareable through a variety of social media platforms, which really helps to connect the whole experience to a larger audience. So this is the primary interface that people interact with in the application itself and how the information is presented. But beyond just this, we've also began exploring other opportunities as well related to mobile platforms. And I'm going to pass it over to Dave now to talk a little bit about one of our recent projects as a case study for how this can be applied to a particular community. Dave?
Yeah, thank you. And I guess for those on the line here, just be thinking about what parallels might exist between this concrete example and maybe in your neck of the woods. So Mineral County, Montana is a pretty rural county in western Montana, only has a population of about 4,000 people total. County seat is in Superior, Montana, with a population of only 851 souls, and it has a pretty deteriorated downtown core, Main Street core. The timber industry in this county was traditionally its mainstay, but due to a number of factors over the past few years, it has essentially withered on the vine. So the folks in the county collectively are really, I think, at a crossroads in terms of trying to figure out how do you maintain your quality of life in this area and also enhance the economic vitality and not lose any of your character and personality, if you will, in the process. So about a year ago, we collaborated with a regional economic development district in western Montana and the Mineral County Historical Society to submit a grant proposal to the state of Montana Department of Commerce. They have a granting program that's geared towards digital tourism, and we were successful in garnering about $40,000 of grant money to do a number of things to address some of the challenges faced in Mineral County. One of the first things that we realized is that the Historical Society had virtually no digital footprint, and what footprint they had is not a footprint that you necessarily want to follow. So for instance, they have two websites right now, not one but two, and neither of which are maintained, and I had to remind myself this morning how bad one of the websites was by going to the website. It's a free website put together by an outfit called Tripod that flashes all manner of advertisements across the screen, one of which I noticed this morning was announcing the 4 signs of heart attacks, with replete with graphic imagery of someone's leg with an open wound on it, and what says come to my community more than imagery like that? So that's where we started, and what you're seeing on your screen now is the screenshot of the website that we created for them that's going to go live on Friday of this week. We also developed interpretive site content for over 30 sites throughout the county, did some videography work, developed promotional materials such as the example of the rack card that you're seeing on the screen, and basically tried to figure out some ways in which to peel folks off of Interstate 90, which bisects the county and for many travelers is merely seen as a way to get from point A to point B through the county, not recognizing that there are some pretty cool things on either side of the interstate, and certainly some opportunities by the local communities to get heads in beds, to get folks onto their main streets, and to spend a few more dollars in their communities. So this is a real exciting project. It's on the cusp of launching. The website that you see on the screen is Interface. It's a front-end interface with the database that Tim and Patrick referenced earlier that has 60,000 sites in the database. And it's really meant to create a seamless experience for travelers so that they can use the Next Exit History app, whether they're in Ohio or Montana or the state of Washington, and not have to worry about when they're rolling through Mineral County, do I need to fish around on Google Play or at the App Store to see if this area has a website or an app that would enhance my traveling. They can use the one platform and see as they're traveling those sites on either side of their current location. And I'll certainly be available for questions a little bit later pertaining to this project, but it's, I think, a concrete example of how this digital technology is being leveraged in a way that's meant to enhance and actually increase economic development, and particularly here in Montana, rural communities that have depressed economies currently. Tim?
Oh, thank you, Dave. I appreciate that. So I'm going to quickly just talk a little bit about what's kind of coming down the road in terms of development for Next Exit History. So as Pat mentioned in a previous section, you know, the developing a mobile app or any piece of software for that matter really requires a lot of thought about whatever's coming down the road next in terms of user expectations. So we are constantly looking at what we can do next. So we're going to be rolling out a brand new updated version of Next Exit History in 2016, and that was in part due to our work with Preservation 50 and the commemoration of the National Historic Preservation Act. We were very privileged to be named a mobile partner, or the mobile partner of Preservation 50 last year, and as part of that, we spent a very large amount of time in 2015 attending conferences, traveling around to a variety of organizations, including attending the National Main Streets Conference earlier in the year in Atlanta, and talking to clients, users, colleagues in the field about how Next Exit History could be made more valuable for preservation professionals and entities. And the outcome of these discussions and focus groups really is at the heart of this newly designed user interface for NEH in 2016 that builds on all of the existing strengths that we've already talked about in our opinion, and really adds additional features to the apps that are really focused on economic development and increased interpretive capabilities. But one of the most critical elements of the new app is an attention to newly accepted mobile standards for user interfaces. So since the first iPhone launched way back in 2007, there have been a lot of different movements within mobile app design, all trying to really experiment with and establish a set of best practices and standards for how app interfaces are designed. And we are really now just starting to come into an era that's seeing the emergence of truly standardized manners in which to present this information, how people use mobile applications. So after all these years of kind of trial and error developing apps, we're integrating a lot of these accepted standards this year into Next Exit History in terms of how people move through the app and how buttons are placed and how people scroll and swipe and things of that nature. All of those aspects are really kind of coming into their own, and there's some industry best practices that are now expected from users, all of which are being integrated into the new apps. So in addition, we're also putting a premium, a bigger focus on imagery within the app. So one of the primary ways people will be able to explore the cultural landscape around them, although the map feature will still be the primary vehicle, is through kind of a more engaging set of imagery, so that people can quickly scroll through sites and see images and pictures that will get them excited about potentially going and seeing these places in person. We're also really putting a focus on creating tour routes, very strategic ways of moving people through communities, so that somebody could come into a town and take a very, very focused, structured tour developed by the professionals and the people that know those resources better than anybody. On top of that, we're also making the app completely offline capable, so that if somebody does not have an internet connection, they can download the information beforehand. This is particularly useful not so much in an urban environment or a downtown environment, but environments like national parks and Forest Service sites and things of that nature. But probably the most interesting and useful and valuable tool that we're adding to the new apps in terms of economic development is the ability to tie historic sites to historic districts and economic development areas and businesses within those areas. So adding layers onto the app that can connect with that information, and as somebody is exploring the historical community around them, can also potentially be steered toward businesses that operate in those historic districts that support preservation and adaptive reuse and other aspects of preservation within those communities. So we're very excited about this new version of the app that will be coming out in 2016, and as Patrick mentioned, we're working on a project with the National Museum of African American History and Culture and some other entities as part of the initial rollout for that new version. So with that, I think I'm going to allow Patrick to kind of recap a little bit about what we've talked about, and then I think we're going to open it up to questions. And it looks like we got some questions coming in as well. So Patrick?
Sure. Thank you, Tim. And I think just sort of to recap, the way this academic project that we put together all those years ago has really evolved into something that's really valuable for solving a whole range of problems, whether or not those problems are within historic communities who can't really find a way to access the new digital world, or whether it's solving problems for how do you actually get people, heritage tourists coming in. We know something about tourists in the state of Florida, and it's interesting that the heritage tourist market, the ones who actually are interested in this kind of thing, have a tendency to have a higher income, a higher education level, and accordingly they stay longer and they spend more. These aren't made-up numbers. These are actually statistics that have pretty solid background to them. And how do we tie to those people? So in doing this, we really created Next Exit History to be educational, to provide that opportunity to show something. But big challenge was, how do we keep it from being obviously educational? I like to tell a story when we first came up with the History Hunters game, the interactive component to it, because you can pull up a Wikipedia site and find a lot of things, true or not, a lot of people don't care, but it was actually, it was a Boy Scout troop that I took up to a scout camp in Georgia, and we stopped on the border, and I put together the little component, a little test model of the game, and I said, you guys want to play a game? This was 4 days after their end of their school year, and they said, no. I said, well, it's on the iPad. You want to try it? Well, we'll try that. Next thing I know, I had a whole Boy Scout troop of 35 kids running around this small town that nobody had been at in Georgia for ages, trying to solve questions, looking for trivia components. The trivia part drawn on the Junior Ranger program model. The scavenger hunt elements, they come directly from the geocaching model. And these kids were so fired up. And the really cool part was that on the way back, they asked if we could stop in the same town and see it again. And I said, well, we've already done it. And the fact that they wanted to do it was cool, but what was even more cool was that they could remember what they had seen. They could answer the questions again, which said that they weren't just engaged, they were excited, but they were actually learning along the way. So that engagement part is key, and the interactive element is really essential. What if they built an app and nobody came? This is a tragic reality we're finding across the country. The enthusiasm over, as some of you may have already experienced with QR codes, that nobody ever looks at and nobody ever accesses. And what if you go and you built an app and nobody's able to find it, or nobody takes the time to find it? We're seeing what we tragically might call, the buyer's remorse world of people who say, gosh, we spent an enormous amount of money on building an app and we've had 25 downloads, and we know that most of those are people who are on our board of directors or within our own historical community. That's sort of a solution that we've solved here by saying if somebody gets in their vehicle down in Key West and they drive all the way up to Sandusky to go to Cedar Point, they're going to be able to learn about the history and interact with the communities all along the way. And having that social media connectivity is an essential part of it. The fact that people can share and talk about what they've discovered and those moments of interaction, which are really, really cool. During this last summer, I took a class of students across the American West where, in anticipation of the 100th anniversary of the National Park Service, we created interactive backpacks of content for 21 national park units across the West. And in doing this, it wasn't just, well, here's Old Faithful Geyser and here's, this part of Yellowstone, but rather, how do we tell the cool story about it? How do you get in there and learn about not just the landscape and the nature, but the wildlife, the early settlers who were there, the people who got displaced when the federal government came in, to the point where if you speed in Yellowstone, you actually are violating a federal law and end up in federal court. All of these really historic interactive pieces so that when people are there, they understand, they're excited. It tells them something really compelling about it. And as Tim pointed out, with the new design, taking them directly to these particular points. And having them go to these particular points has so much value because so much of history is related right next to the local soda shop or the local restaurant or the local hotel. And if there are people who are driving around there, you can say, gosh, congratulations, you've checked in here, you've learned about this historic site, and have a little piece that pops up, as Tim showed in one of those graphics, to say, why don't you go right in here and eat at Bob's restaurant and get yourself 15% off of your bill because you've passed as part of it. A success piece in learning and interacting and actually driving people into the economic side of the world. It's an exciting time, certainly, for technology, and we're excited the fact that this little academic project that we started coming up on 10 years ago has managed to turn into what it is today. So with that, I will wrap that up, and I think Tim and I and Dave, as necessary, can answer any questions that anybody has on this one.
Patrick, and I can maybe help. I can maybe help to kind of mediate, moderate these questions. So maybe I'll answer some of the technical questions and allow Dave and Patrick to chime in with maybe some of the questions related to projects and things of that nature. So the first question we have is from Megan asking, I'm curious what the back end looks like for the groups and organizations that are adding content, or is all of that done by Next Exit History? So I can answer that pretty quickly. When we first started this project at UWF, we really put a premium on making sure that the information going into the application and being presented to people was vetted. So this information comes through basically a gatekeeping program in our database. Now, with that being said, as we're growing pretty significantly in terms of the amount of information in the database, with the new apps coming out, we are exploring ways to give the groups we work with access to their content so that they can update it in real time and things of that nature. So finding that happy medium between guaranteeing that the information is accurate, secure, and not kind of a wiki style, but at the same time also providing organizations and groups we work with the opportunity to update information is something that we are definitely working with. And over the course of the next year, as we roll out the new apps, we are going to be exploring that option. But for now, groups work with us to put the information into the database. They provide it to us, or we, in the case of, say, Mineral County, we do research and writing because, of course, we are historians first and foremost and technologists second, I guess, for lack of a better way to describe it, and then we add the information into the database. So hopefully that answers Megan's question. So Patrick and Dave, do you want to answer some of these other questions, or?
Actually, Tim, why don't you go ahead and read them out? Right now we're looking at them and they're really small, and since you seem to be in there.
Sure. So the next question is, what is your experience level with major urban markets? So I think maybe, Patrick, if you want to talk a little bit about some of your experiences with East Coast cities that we've worked in,
sure,
to your students and others, that might be a good way to answer that question.
Absolutely. And as I mentioned, I took a class this last summer. I teach summer classes which are designed to be immersive experiences, but also to interact with historical groups across the country. And while I do a class on Lewis and Clark, I do another one on the history of the American West, the Atomic West. One class I do is looking at civil liberties and civil rights sites. And creating content, usually in urban areas, there are core areas which people have a connection to. One of my graduate students actually was working up in Pittsburgh, and while granted it's a neighboring state, we don't have to talk about the competition there. In Pittsburgh, looking at the historic elements that are there, and their historic preservation community really has a different motivation about the site that they're looking at. But those relationships are really key of how do you tie somebody who may be connected to a historic structure versus that of somebody who is so being able to get those handshakes has actually been really beneficial. And the neat thing is that depending on how urban areas work, seeing a number of backpacks and the new tour feature that come into play can be really exciting because you can really cater how people move around an urban setting and interact with either sites that you want to create for them, or they can create their own backpacks of content which take them through a broader range of sites that are within those locations particularly. So there's a broad mix of opportunities, and really it's only limited by the creativity and the direction of where it is that we might structure those backpacks themselves.
Okay, so the next question is, can you go over the cost structure? Is there a fee to development corps? Is there a price on the app? So the app is completely free for users, and it was always our plan to make that always the case. So the end user is completely free. In terms of how we keep the lights on, we do work with organizations on the back end to help fund the perpetuation of the app and growth of the app in that way. So we really work with organizations based on a custom scope of work. So in terms of an actual price on the app, it's kind of difficult to go over that in a general sense. But depending on how much information an organization is putting into the database, depending on how much work, how much of the content is being developed by the heritage organization, how much is being developed by us, and things of those natures go into developing a cost structure that it reflects those efforts. And I'll let Patrick and Dave expand on that if they would like.
Sure. This is Dave. I'll just jump in and say just in a little more specificity. So on the one end of the spectrum would be the case of a Mineral County type project where we are on the ground conducting research. Our historians and cultural resource professionals are doing the interpretive writing. We're developing video content and then uploading all of that to our database to make it available via the app, which is free to the end user as a download. On the other end of the spectrum would be those cases where maybe a downtown district or maybe a business improvement district, TBID, or a community has an established walking tour that is already quality vetted content, and it's more a matter of then looking at that as a shovel-ready project that could be uploaded to our database with relative ease. So it really boils down to working with partners to develop a custom scope of work and seeing what the price structure flows out from that. I would also say that once you get this stuff uploaded and available in a digital format like this, the job is not done. So we like to work with partners to develop a plan for ongoing promotion. It's not enough to just print off 1,000 rack cards, which may or may not be distributed. How do you make sure that folks are aware that you have a digital presence, and be that through social media or other means, and really close the loop on what you're trying to accomplish? Patrick?
Yeah, and I think that really does sum it up. And a lot of this is actually about creating a relationship that people recognize the need to leverage their tourism market. And it is true that we have, if you're a small community with a single house, it's possible to put it in there and leave it alone. But often we find, especially when it comes to communities, we actually just completed a conversion package, if you will, for a walking tour that existed in the Coburg, Oregon, to create those relationships about how do we identify what you're going to get. The value of that partnership is in the marketing side. How do you drive people into these locations? Looking at the analytics, things that, all these little elements we didn't really have a chance to cover over about how do you provide feedback. We know people, they're coming to check in, we understand who's in the location, so that we can say, oh, we need to tweak this to drive individuals to these locations. If there's a business that's coming online, a new venture that might exist in the downtown area, we're seeing this in Pensacola as it changes constantly. How do we get people to that location by capitalizing on the research that's there? So really, it's about that partnership and looking at who is there and who's the market. And sometimes, as we realize that there are even those opportunities to talk about different stories, that history is not something that there's one right or wrong answer. A lot of the work that Dave has done out in the West deals with American Indian tribes, and the fact that you can go and look at a community and talk about great accomplishments of technology in the 20th century and building dams and relicensing, but what does that mean for the American Indian culture and the people that are there? And not to say that one is right or wrong, but to be able to have that overlapping conversation so that you're really bringing both narratives or multiple narratives in a place of contested space. All of it comes into play. So there are a whole range of opportunities in creating these partnerships with groups that really we can look to not just solving today's problems and getting in, but how do we solve a whole series of problems and look to new opportunities in terms of connecting people, visitors, to the resources that exist on the landscape and within the communities.
Thanks, Pat. There's some specific questions I think we can try to address. So Liz asks, uvisit.com costs $9,000 for a one-year online tour program. Is yours similar? So as Patrick mentioned, we do offer kind of support for ongoing support for any group that we work with relative to marketing and things of that nature. But in terms of a kind of subscription model, that's not how Next Exit History works. So as Dave mentioned, we work much like we do with a lot of other projects that historic consulting firms do to create a one-time scope of work related to the amount of content coming in. And then again, as Patrick said, if groups are interested in ongoing support relative to marketing and things like that, we can work those out, or analytics coming back into you about the users and things like that might help you to strategically plan for the future. So in terms of a set, this is how much it costs a year. It's a one-time fixed cost for the actual content development and uploading. Pat or Dave, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I do see another question maybe related to this from someone who is apparently in their full-on budget mode for 2016 and is looking for just a general price range. And I will say that based on, for instance, our most recent project that's going to be launching on Friday, where we did the full-blown content development for this client in Mineral County, and are also hosting that within our database. In that scenario, development of content, interpretive content per site, roughly in the neighborhood of about $1,000 a site. But again, I would add the caveat that we would want to work with folks to develop a custom scope based on an individual organization or community's needs.
Absolutely. I'm trying to think. Let's see.
You have one on the users, Tim. You want to talk about promoting the app?
Yeah, I see that. Okay, so Megan asks, can you talk a bit about how Next Exit History helps promote the full app? Well, obviously local groups promote their own region, and what's your number of app downloads, number of users? So in terms of promoting the full app, as Dave mentioned earlier, Next Exit History is geographically ubiquitous. So you can use it in China, or you could use it in Ohio, or any place in between. So that really allows us to market on a grand scale. So we ran one of our first comprehensive marketing campaigns for the app back over the summer related to the work we were doing for the National Park Service. And that was really our first, as Patrick has said again and again, that this started as an academic endeavor, and that we're moving into this new world, so to speak. So we are beginning to plan for additional national marketing campaigns, especially in relation to the new versions of the apps that are coming out. And we are constantly promoting the app through a variety of mediums, social media platforms, obviously our own social media accounts and things of that nature. We attend a number of conferences and other areas like that to promote the app. In terms of number of users, number of downloads, so at this point we have had about somewhere between about 40 and 45,000 downloads over the last few years. And again, that's really without a huge amount of national marketing. We're just kind of moving into that realm. We're really focusing on creating a robust database of content, so that as we really began pushing the users in terms of pushing people towards the app to use it, we wanted to make sure there was something for them to look at. And now that our database has gotten to a point where essentially no matter where somebody is in the continental United States, if they open up the app, there will be something nearby. We have really started pushing our users towards downloading it. So, and
I think,
in terms of, oh, go ahead, Patrick. Sorry.
Oh no, I was just going to piggyback onto that. That one of the really exciting things we discovered was just how the relationship between entities work. Sort of what we're seeing between Mineral County and Missoula. The fact that if you're in one community and you discover there's, this rich interactive content in another area, it's great. As Tim pointed out, when we did our first really major marketing campaign, the interesting part was the connection. If we create a backpack of content that we released that took place in Great Sand Dunes, then the local market got excited. We had news contacts from neighboring towns in Colorado and Colorado Springs, and then as you work your way up, then you have sort of the overlapping connection with Great Rocky Mountain National Park, and as you're moving across, so that you have sort of this cross-pollination within communities. So if one community is involved with it, another community is involved with it, it really creates this tapestry, very much like we saw with the National Park Service, for those people who are going to say, I'm going to spend my summer, exploring my environment, exploring the West. I get to see this, and then I get to move into the next park. Sometimes they're close to each other, like the Grand Teton and Yellowstone. Sometimes they're farther apart. But across the way, they say, let's go to this next destination. So it's sort of self-propagating, which was really one of the cool things that we saw happening during this summer's experience and in the months following.
And I just noticed another question pop up here a little while ago regarding who to contact maybe with more questions, and I would just point folks to the final screen there. Tim Roberts' email address is listed there, and feel free to reach out to Tim if you have more specific questions about either this presentation or Next Exit History.
And I'm sure we can ask Pearl to send out our contact information and the website too, so that people will have access to it. We're happy to help however we can.
Great. So I think we managed to answer all the questions that were posed. So I don't think we missed any. So I guess with that, maybe we'll turn it back over to Pearl.
All right, and yes, I can send out your guys' information in the follow-up email that'll probably go out tomorrow. And I guess with that, I would like to thank everybody for attending the webinar today and thank our presenters for all the great information. For our calendar of upcoming events and our future webinars, please do visit us at heritageohio.org, and have a great day, everybody.
Thank you, Pearl.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.